Hi everyone and welcome back to the next episode of the LMR, that is the last minute revision that we have for the images, under which we'll be dealing with two particular subjects, that is path as well as micro. Right now we are on the subject pathology, in which on day 1 we had discussed all the general path images. Then on day 2 we started with a lot of chapters of systemic path. So if you all remember, yesterday we did the cardiac system, we did the blood vessels, then we did brain and related images. We also finished the respiratory system. Today comes to day 3, and today we are going to do the rest of the system that includes a lot of things under GI tract. Then we'll be moving on to renal or kidney pathology, then a few miscellaneous things like thyroid tumors and ovarian tumors and images related to that you need to know. Tomorrow we'll be meeting again at the same time, and we'll also be discussing all the hematology images. Once we are done with hemat, blood bank and all over the pathology, everything is done, we'll be moving on to the next subject, that is microbiology. So this is going to be uploaded on a daily basis till we finish the images that are important for the exam for these two subjects. And this is particularly for students who are targeting the upcoming FMG December 2021, and I hope these images help you in your preparation. So let's begin with the first topic of the day. First we are going to start with the GI tract, and the very first image is a very classical one where you're seeing a barium study. So it's a radiological investigation that has been done, and at the bottom you can very well appreciate that there is a bird beak appearance. There's a bird beak appearance that is noted, and this bird beak appearance makes it one of the most characteristic findings of achalasia cardia. If you remember from your medicine and surgery knowledge, achalasia cardia is the loss of inhibitory neurons. When I say that there's going to be a loss of the inhibitory neurons, I mean that there is no nitric oxide and there is no VIP. These are the things which relax the esophagus. They normally relax the esophagus. I'm saying there's nothing to relax the esophagus, and that is the reason that the esophagus is in this constricted state. So this is a case of achalasia cardia, a very classical picture. Coming to the next image is again a clinical picture where on endoscopic view, this is an endoscopic view that has been taken from the esophagus, where most of the esophagus is looking pinkish because this pale pink esophagus denotes the normal lining. It is the normal part of the esophagus, whereas once you come across these red velvety irregular areas, these areas tell you that that's how they define it. They call it salmon pink and red areas, and these are the areas which denote Barrett's esophagus. So obviously you need to document it in terms of microscopic examination also. So when you look at a Barrett's esophagus under the microscopy, all of us, I think we know Barrett's esophagus is a kind of a metaplasia. When I say metaplasia, means one epithelium is going to change into another, which also means that the squamous epithelium of the esophagus is going to change into the columnar epithelium. And columnar of which type? It is going to be columnar of the intestinal type. So let me just denote the same over here. So this much of the epithelium that you see out here, this is the squamous epithelium. Whereas the epithelium has changed in this part of the picture, and this is known as the columnar epithelium. And why am I particularly calling it the intestinal columnar epithelium? Because I can see these empty looking cells, and these empty looking cells are the goblet cells, and that is what makes me very sure that I'm dealing with intestinal type of epithelium. The next picture that we have talking about cancers, Barrett's esophagus, can it later on lead to cancer? Yes. Please remember, Barrett's esophagus is a precancerous condition. And which kind of a cancer does it lead to? Because there are round glands that are formed in Barrett's, therefore the cancer that it can result in is adenocarcinoma. So how is it going to look like? Exactly like this. I think everyone can appreciate that if they say there's a mass in the esophagus and this is the kind of picture that you're seeing the presence of glands, you're going to call it adenocarcinoma. On the other hand, if you all get to see the presence of this picture, so I think over here, what is very, very evident is going to be the presence of these round and round pink pearls, and we all know that these are referred to as keratin pearls. And keratin pearls is something that you see in squamous cell carcinoma of the esophagus. So having discussed esophagus, let's quickly move on to the next organ, and right after the esophagus, we have the stomach. Before I go into all the things that the stomach can have, one bacteria which classically tends to, get going in the stomach, and all the diseases that it causes are in the stomach, and that is Helicobacter pylori. So they really ask you, what is the special stain? This is another MCI exam favorite question. What is the special stain for Helicobacter pylori? And that is the Worden starry silver stain. So first you need to know the name. The name of the stain is Worden starry silver stain. And the rule is that whenever I'm talking about a silver stain, the color that the whatever you're trying to stain, like over here you're trying to stain H. pylori, so whatever you're trying to stain will get a black color. When you're using a silver stain, the color that I will get will be a black color. So H. pylori has come black out here. Now what are the questions that they ask you pertinent to H. pylori? They always ask you that what are the two tumors that H. pylori leads to. So you'll say both the tumors that H. pylori leads to, both the tumors are going to be in the stomach. One is known as gastric adenocarcinoma, that's one tumor that it causes, and the other is known as a gastric lymphoma. Stomach or gastric lymphoma. I think all the MCI students, all the FMG students, you know that gastric lymphoma is given another name, and that is maltoma. So indirectly I can say that H. pylori causes adenocarcinoma and it causes maltoma. And if I ask you for the special stain, you will be very clear that the special stain is Worden starry silver. Let's move forward. There's another disease of the stomach where it's hardly looking like the stomach, where the stomach starts looking like the brain. And that disease is known as the Menetrier's disease. So first and foremost, what is Menetrier's disease? In Menetrier's disease, in the stomach, I start seeing giant cerebriform rugae. Look at the term that has been mentioned over here. Cerebriform rugae. So all the rugae of the stomach, they are looking very big, just like the cerebrum, just like the brain. See, the brain has these rugae. Similarly, the stomach has also started showing these giant cerebriform rugae. And that is Menetrier's disease. One question that comes in the exam is that Menetrier's disease is an increase in which mediator, and why has it happened? It is an increase in TGF alpha. So remember that as a theory question. Menetrier's disease, where the stomach looks like the brain, it is an increase in TGF alpha. So talking about different appearances of the brain, one appearance is this, where the stomach is looking like the brain. What is it known as when the stomach starts looking like a leather bottle? So what is that leather bottle appearance known as? So remember, that is given a fancy name called Linitis plastica. So the image that you see over here is Linitis plastica. What is Linitis plastica? It is indicative of cancer. Linitis plastica is diffuse gastric cancer. When I say gastric cancer, we know we are talking about a malignancy. When I say diffuse, means it's growing in the entire wall. Diffusely, it is growing in the entire wall. As a result of which, this wall will become very, very rigid. There's a cancer growing inside it, it's going to become extremely rigid, and that is how it appears like a leather bottle. That is the reason that you call it a leather bottle or a Linitis plastica, because it's become very stiff and rigid. Why? Because there's a cancer growing in it diffusely. And when I look at this same cancer, now this diffuse gastric cancer which is growing over here, if I look at it under the microscope, it's going to show me signet ring cells. So please remember, diffuse gastric cancer shows me the presence of signet ring cells. What do I mean by signet ring? See guys, whenever I draw a cell, this is what I usually do. This is the cell. I always draw the pink color cytoplasm, and I make the nucleus somewhere in the center. The nucleus is always in the center. What happens in a signet ring? In a signet ring, this is the same cell that you have over here. Now this time, the nucleus has gone and is sitting over here. The nucleus is gone and is sitting at the periphery. The nucleus is like a ring. It has been pushed at the periphery. So why has the nucleus been pushed at the periphery? Someone else is sitting inside the cell, and that someone else is mucin. Someone else who's sitting inside it is going to be mucin. That is why this is the poor nucleus which is sitting at the periphery. Have a look at these these cells. you'll know exactly what we are talking about. In all these cells, as you notice, the nucleus has gone and is sitting at the periphery, and rest of the cell has mucin. These are all known as signet ring cells. They are seen in this diffuse gastric cancer, which gives you the Linitis plastica appearance. Well, having discussed this, after stomach, now let's move on to the images that you need to know for the intestine. So the first image that you have to know for the intestine, where they'll give you a history of an intestinal biopsy. I'll tell you how the question comes. There will be an intestinal biopsy or a tissue that will be taken, and you'll ask me why. Because this patient has fatty stools. Fatty stools means fat is coming out in the stool. So a more technical term for that will be steatorrhea. Patient will be having fat that is coming out in the stools, and when they do an intestinal biopsy, they found that there is a cluster of these pink color cells. Why are they coming so pink? Because I've used a stain called PAS. P for PAS, P for pink. PAS always gives a pink color, and these cells, these are these cells, right? So what cells are they? They are macrophages. And in which layer of the intestine are we talking about? We are seeing these cells in the lamina propria. Now, if these words are written in the question, that I am seeing PAS positive macrophages in the lamina propria on an intestinal biopsy when my patient is coming to me with fatty stools, I am very clear that I'm dealing with Whipple's disease. There is no other diagnosis that you have to think of. So is Whipple's disease a malabsorption? Is it a problem in the absorption? Yes, of course. That is why fat is not getting absorbed. That is the reason that all of the fat is coming out in the stools. Now, having said that, what organism causes it? The word tells me everything. Whipple's disease is caused by Tropherema whipplei. That is why we called it Whipple's disease. It is caused by Tropherema whipplei. So that's the question that you get in the exam. Well, having said that, let's move on to the next set of disorders. I think everyone is very well versed about how the MCI exam is always full of questions to do with inflammatory bowel disease. They always ask you inflammatory bowel disease has something called Crohn's disease, and inflammatory bowel disease has something called ulcerative colitis. So firstly, they always ask you the radiological appearance of Crohn's versus ulcerative. In Crohn's disease, we'll do the theory first. We see something called string sign of Cantor. String sign of Cantor is seen in Crohn's disease, whereas ulcerative colitis gives you the lead pipe appearance. Let me show you pictures of both. Here is a barium study, and here I can see the string sign of Cantor, which is seen in Crohn's disease, and very clearly you can see that the intestine has become like a string, and that is why it gets its name. Whereas when you're dealing with the case of ulcerative colitis, you can again very well appreciate there is a lead pipe appearance. See this segment of the intestine over here, it's become straight like a lead pipe. Normally when I draw the intestine, I draw it like this. These pouches that I make, these pouches are known as haustration. That is how a normal intestine looks like. But now in ulcerative colitis, these haustrations are lost. That is why the intestine looks straight, and that is what is known as the lead pipe appearance of ulcerative colitis. So coming back, what's the other difference between them? Which of them shows us granulomas? So please remember, Crohn's disease is the one that shows us the presence of granulomas. So let me show you a picture of a granuloma as well. So first and foremost, it's nothing to do with caseous necrosis. It's a non-caseating granuloma. Let me see this picture that has been given first and foremost. How do I know that it has been taken from the intestine? I can see these cells out here. These empty looking cells, these are the goblet cells. When I know these are the goblet cells, I know I'm dealing with intestine. Thereafter, I see this round structure which is present, and if I zoom into it further, I can see that it has a giant cell. Now, if something has a giant cell, I can automatically correlate that this must be a component of a granuloma. And yes, this is a non-caseating granuloma that you see in Crohn's disease. That's another feature that helps you differentiate. Well, Crohn's has two more features which ulcerative does not have, and they are known as the two C's. What are the two C's of Crohn's? First and foremost, it shows us creeping fat. Creeping fat means If you look at this segment of intestine, it has fat all around, yellow fat from this border till this border. It's like a bag of fat. The entire intestine has been wrapped up with fat. Creeping fat is seen in Crohn's disease. And another C is when you look at the inside aspect. The inner aspect also shows you this appearance, and this is known as the cobblestone appearance. So please remember, Crohn's disease shows us C and C, creeping fat and cobblestone appearance. Well, having done with these, obviously these are not very prominent or not features of ulcerative colitis, so we would not be seeing it under those for obvious reasons. Having said that, in the intestine, if you get this, now coming to the next one, if you get this kind of a picture where they are very nicely showing you the presence of a flask-shaped ulcer. See, this is the intestine and you're seeing the presence of a flask-shaped ulcer. You're dealing with Entamoeba histolytica. Amoebiasis, amoebic ulcer. What are the questions that you get on this Entamoeba histolytica if I ask you from microbiology point of view? I think everyone knows that Entamoeba histolytica can, number one, involve the intestine, and we have very well seen that in the intestine what kind of an ulcer is it forming? Flask-shaped ulcer. Well, it can also affect the liver, and in the liver it gives a very classical appearance which they give you in the exam, and that is known as the anchovy sauce appearance. Anchovy sauce appearance is seen in the liver with Entamoeba histolytica, and in the intestine it is flask-shaped ulcer. Now there's a little bit of a confusion that students have. What is that confusion? The confusion between a flask which is going in versus a volcano which is coming out. Please do not get confused between these two appearances, because as different as they are, flask versus volcano, the diseases are also poles apart. When I'm talking about a flask-shaped ulcer, you are dealing with Entamoeba histolytica. Versus when I'm dealing that in the intestine there is a volcano-like eruption, like a volcano, something has erupted out, you are dealing with pseudomembranous enterocolitis. Pseudomembranous enterocolitis is a condition which is caused due to Clostridium difficile. That's why I said that was a flask-shaped ulcer and that was caused because of Entamoeba histolytica. This is a volcano-like eruption. This is known as PMEC and is caused by Clostridium difficile. Why? Because the patient has been on a long-term use of antibiotics. So some long-term antibiotic usage will be mentioned. Maybe the patient was using long-term third-generation cephalosporins, or some long-term use of antibiotic will be mentioned, following which patient got infected with Clostridium difficile, as a result of which all the dirty necrotic material, the dirty, dead, necrotic material, like a lava, it has burst out of the intestine. Like the lava, it has burst out of the intestine, and after that it will come and settle back down. When it will come and settle back down, it will form a membrane like this. It will form a membrane like this, and that is why you call it pseudomembranous. So they ask you very set questions over here. What is the history that you'll get? Long-term use of antibiotics. What is the organism? You'll know it is a Clostridium difficile. What is the appearance known as? You should remember this picture of a volcano that I've made over here, volcano-like eruption. And pseudomembranous, this membrane, on which aspect of the intestine are you seeing this membrane? The membrane is seen on the mucosal aspect, inner aspect. The membrane is seen on the mucosal or the inner aspect. These are the set pattern questions that you get for pseudomembranous enterocolitis. Nothing much that is more troublesome than this. Coming to the next. Well, one more topic which is very famous in the intestine are polyps. There are two polyps pertinent specifically where the examiner asks you a lot of questions. First question would be a 5-year-old child who's suffering from bleeding per rectal, and if you put all the words together, you will know exactly which polyp are they talking about. 5-year-old child who's dealing with bleeding per rectal, which kind of a polyp? Age tells you juvenile, bleeding tells you rectum, so juvenile rectal polyp. So as such, you don't need the image to come to a diagnosis. If you have a 5-year-old child with bleeding per rectal, you anyway know the diagnosis. But if they give you the image, because this was the image that came in the previous year NEET PG exam, and that is why I'm giving it to you, the juvenile rectal polyp will show you these big glands. So you call them cystically dilated glands. Juvenile rectal polyp gives you the cystically dilated glands. Well, having said that, let's move on to the next polyp, which is very, very famous. But before I come to the polyp, what they would actually ask you is this. They'll give you a clinical history. I think everyone is very well aware of Peutz-Jeghers syndrome. So when I talk about Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, the P actually stands for how we've learned it. P we would deal with pigmentation. So you can see the mucosal pigmentation that I see over here. And JE means jejunum. So what is the most common location for the polyps to occur? So the jejunum is the most common location where the polyps will occur, and these polyps are a little characteristic. So this polyp looks like this. It looks like a tree. It looks like a tree. So very commonly they are called as arborizing polyps, or they are also referred to as Christmas tree polyps. They are also referred to as Christmas tree polyps. Well, having said that, what makes it a Christmas tree? So obviously whenever you have a tree, you will have some branches. You will have some branches, and those branches that you see over here, if I highlight, what are those branches made up of? Those branches are nothing but smooth muscle. Those branches are made up of smooth muscle. You must remember that. So please remember, P for pigmentation, Peutz, JE for jejunum, and the polyps that occur in the jejunum are going to be the classical Christmas tree or arborizing polyps. Now, what if there is a disease where a minimum of 100 polyps are present in the intestine? So you can see in this, the segment of the intestine, it is studded with polyps. There are way too many polyps that are present. A minimum of 100 is actually the diagnostic criteria. So more than 100 polyps being present in the intestine, and what mutation? So firstly, the disorder that I'm dealing with is FAP. Familial adenomatous polyposis, and it is because of which gene mutation? It is because of APC gene mutation present on chromosome 5. Please remember, it is APC gene mutation. Chromosome 5q is what is problematic. So FAP is because of APC gene mutation. Minimum how many polyps? Minimum of 100 polyps is the diagnostic criteria. Having said that, coming to the last, can these polyps be cancerous? Yes. FAP leading to colon cancer. If someone asks you what is the incidence that familial adenomatous polyposis, if not prophylactically treated, what is going to, how much or how many of them are going to actually result in colon cancer? And your answer is going to be 100%. So one last question which actually comes radiologically to you. What is the radiological appearance of colon cancer? And the radiological appearance is apple core deformity. For colon cancer, we classically see apple core deformity. So it's not apple, it's the core of the apple. It's an eaten up apple. So very clearly you can see it's the core of the apple that I am dealing with. Well, actually there are not many apple related things that you have in path. If I ask you where do you see the apple green birefringence, then I think everyone would remember because I've taught you. Apple green birefringence is seen with amyloid. And on which stain is it seen? It is seen when I put a stain called Congo red. And which microscope that I have to use to see this apple green birefringence? I'll have to see the polarizing microscope. Coming to the next, where do I see the apple core deformity? Apple core deformity or apple core defect is seen in colon cancer. Okay, so these were the two apples that can probably come to you in the exam, and yes, that marks the end of the images that can come to you in colon cancer or the images that can come to you in the GI tract, with which I think we should now move on to the next topic. And the next topic or the next system is going to be the renal pathology. So the first thing that we are going to do in renal pathology are going to be a lot of spotters. So a lot of spotters which we'll quickly cover, and the very first one of them is a recent exam question. So you have to know this, where obviously you have a section of the kidney has been cut open, you are also given the radiological appearance, you can see some calcific deposits happening here, same you can see. So guys, this first and foremost always comes with a history, and the history that would be given to you will be a case of sterile pyuria. When I say sterile pyuria, pyuria means pus cells. Means that are there pus cells coming in the urine of the patient? Yes, there are pus cells in the urine. But do you see any bacteria in the urine? Do you see any E. coli or any other bacteria? No, the bacteria are not seen. Then what is it because of? It is because of why are the pus cells coming? If I'm not able to see any bacteria along with it, why are the pus cells coming? Because this is seen with TB. So how does TB present? Urine finding of TB? Sterile pyuria. And if I'm saying TB, then what necrosis has been can be seen? This cheesiness that you're seeing in the kidney. Obviously, we are dealing with caseous necrosis. So it's the same caseous necrosis and calcium that you're seeing radiologically over here as well. And in fact, the radiological image is what came recently in this year's exam. Having said that, this is the first spotter, and this has been given a very fancy name rather than just calling TB of the kidney. They call it putty kidney. So remember, the question that will come is that this image will be given and the option will be putty kidney. Putty kidney is TB of the kidney. Coming to other appearances, I think this I taught you yesterday also, that when we have a case of benign hypertension, what is the appearance of the kidney that is going to be seen? See, the kidney surface is looking very granular, and that is known as leather grain appearance. Versus, so this is benign hypertension. Versus, if I'm dealing with a case of malignant hypertension, then we see something known as flea-bitten kidney. And when I say flea-bitten kidney, can you see that there are dark spots? These dark spots are nothing but punctate hemorrhages, pinpoint hemorrhages that are present, and that indicates malignant hypertension. So repeating, benign hypertension, leather grain kidney, malignant hypertension shows you flea-bitten kidney. And I gave all of you one homework yesterday. So every day I give you a homework and I tell you to finish it up by the next day, which you guys have been doing it religiously as I've been seeing. So now I asked you all the causes that can result in flea-bitten kidney. And I think most of the students know that this goes by the mnemonic, we hate PSM. So, well, that's not something that you should hate, because in the FFG exam, PSM has started coming up with many questions. So, you like it or you not, you actually have to study it. And this session also, in fact, this year, the session that was conducted by the FMG, this had couple of PSM, especially had couple of tough questions. So, do revise it before the exam well. Anyway, coming back, flea-bitten kidney, WE stands for Wegener's granulomatosis. So, all these conditions that I'm telling you, they can show the same flea-bitten kidney, Wegener's granulomatosis. Then coming to H stands for something known as HUS and something in the same spectrum, that is TTP. HUS and TTP. Okay, coming to the next, there is a disease which I'll be teaching you today, and that is PSGN, post streptococcal glomerulonephritis. Coming to the next, we have subacute bacterial endocarditis and SLE. Subacute bacterial endocarditis and SLE. And then what we are studying over here, that is a case of malignant hypertension that can also show you the flea-bitten kidney. Well, actually, there are many more causes, but for the FMG exam, I think this is more than enough. Flea-bitten kidney seen in Wegener's granulomatosis, HUS-TTP, post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, subacute bacterial endocarditis and SLE, and malignant hypertension. So here I had a case of malignant hypertension showing me flea-bitten kidney. And what does benign hypertension show me? It shows me the leather grain kidney. There's another kidney which we see, or for that matter, whenever in front of any organ, if I put the term waxy, can you see this kidney over here, which is showing you this whitish candle wax kind of an appearance? Whenever I put the term waxy, what I'm dealing with is amyloidosis. So if I say waxy liver, waxy spleen, waxy kidney, or waxy anything, waxiness is seen because of amyloid deposition. So these are all the spotters that we are doing. Coming to the next spotter, I think once you look at it and you need exactly a second to answer that yes, a lot of cysts are forming. So this is polycystic kidney disease. Now, polycystic kidney disease can either be autosomal dominant or it can be autosomal recessive. So you'll say this is a genetic thing. I cannot look at a kidney and tell without knowing the family history. I just can't look at the kidney and say, oh, it is dominant or recessive. But yeah, there is a catch point actually which I want to tell you. So over here, if you look carefully, you see cysts on the outer aspect. You will say that yes, definitely the cysts are present on the outer surface of the kidney. And when you cut the kidney, you see the cysts inside also. So you're seeing the cysts outside also, and you're seeing the cysts inside as well. So cysts are present on both aspects, means we are more in favor of autosomal dominant. Versus if I say the outer surface is totally normal, it looks like a normal kidney from the outside, but when I cut the kidney, the inner surface definitely has cysts present. The inner surface has these round cysts present. You'll say, yeah, this is more in favor of recessive. So remember, when I'm dealing with autosomal dominant, when I'm dealing with autosomal dominant, DO dominant means dono. Outer and inner, dono surfaces are going to show you the cysts. Whereas when I'm dealing with autosomal recessive, they are receding. They are only receding inside. Cysts are present only on the inner aspect. Then coming to the next spotter, what do I note over here? I can see they will obviously give you the history that this is a renal biopsy that has been performed. And what I see very characteristically are these round tubules. Loads of them, now that you start noticing, you'll see loads of these tubules, and all of these tubules are filled with some pinkish material. All these tubules are filled with pinkish material, and that is giving it kind of appearance of a thyroid. It's really not a thyroid, but I can call it thyroid-like. So I'm saying that there is going to be thyroidization of the tubules that has happened. And when we are dealing with thyroidization of the tubules, the disease that I'm dealing with is CPN. What is CPN? CPN stands for chronic pyelonephritis. CPN stands for chronic pyelonephritis. So that's one of the most classical questions that you get. Chronic pyelonephritis shows you thyroidization of the tubules. Well, having done all the spotters, now let's move on to the next thing, and that is, what if the kidney starts, when you're dealing with renal, what you can't ignore is urine. Urine examination and looking at the urine under the microscope is very, very important. So, under the microscope, you tend to see two things. Number one, we can see the presence of casts, and number two, we can see the presence of crystals. So we need to be very clear with images of casts and crystals because they will be asked in the exam. So first, let us start with this over here. If I see a crystal, this is a crystal. This is a cystine crystal. Why do I call it a cystine crystal? How did I identify it? Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is hexagonal. So instead of cystine, I will now remember it as 16. So cystine crystal has 6 sides, that is, it is hexagonal. Coming to the next. Here I am seeing very thin needles. Very thin needles. So if you are seeing the presence of thin needles, there is tyrosine. Thin and thin. So tyrosine crystals are thin needles. Next, if I get to see there are crystals which have thorns on their surface. So you can see these crystals have these thorns. So you call them apple thorn crystals. If I'm seeing apple thorn crystals, they are made up of ammonium biurate. They are made up of ammonium biurate. Coming to the next, there are 2 calcium crystals that you have to know. 2 calcium oxalates. One is calcium oxalate dihydrate. One is calcium oxalate monohydrate. How will I differentiate them in the exam? See, if I look at this one, this is looking like an envelope. It's looking like an envelope, whereas when I see this one, this is looking like a dumbbell. One is an envelope, one is a dumbbell. So remember, mona is dumb is how the students learn it. Mostly this is how they learn it. Monohydrate, calcium oxalate monohydrate is a dumbbell shaped one, and dihydrate is the envelope one. In case you forget this in the exam, I also have another mnemonic, that is D is not for D. Di is not dumbbell. Di is not dumbbell, it's opposite. Monohydrate is dumbbell shaped, dihydrate is envelope shaped. Coming to the next one, and this includes something that is known as cholesterol crystals. Cholesterol crystals are something, if you see, none of them are looking like a complete box. All of them are broken somewhere or the other. So you can see over here, this one is chipped off, this is chipped off. They're all broken chips, and that is a cholesterol crystal. So we'll always learn that chips are very rich in fat and cholesterol. So broken chips are nothing but the cholesterol crystals. Moving on to the next, if you see a crystal like this in the urine with a line going through, it looks like a coffin lid. And this coffin lid crystal is known as the triple phosphate or the struvite crystals. It is known as triple phosphate or struvite crystals. And having said that, one last one is left, and that is it can take any shape. See, it's looking like a rhomboid here, then it's looking like a triangle here. So it basically can take any shape in the universe. The one which can take any shape in the universe, like a rhomboid or a parallelogram or a triangle, that universal shaped crystal is known as uric acid crystal. So you're done with all the crystals. A very, very quick recap. The one which has 6 sides is cysteine. The one which is chips, broken chips, that is cholesterol. The one which is thin needle, thin tyrosine crystals. Then there are 2 calcium oxalates. Remember, mona is dumb, monohydrate is dumbbell shaped, dihydrate is envelope shaped. Then we have the one with apple thorn. Apple thorn, A for A, is ammonium biurate. Then we have the coffin lid, which is triple phosphate or struvite. And the one that can take any shape in the universe is the uric acid crystal. So that takes care of all the crystals at least. Now let's move on to the identification of the castes. When I say caste, the first one that I'm dealing with is known as hyaline caste. When I say hyaline caste, please remember it is a totally normal finding in the urine. Can you see this transparent cylinder that we have over here and this transparent cylinder that we have over here? So remember, this cylindrical caste, which is totally transparent, it is a normal finding. If you can get this, a normal person, and can also show this in the urine. So how is it seen? Why is a normal person also showing these findings in a urine? Because a normal person produces a protein called Tam Horsfall protein. Which part of the kidney produces this Tam Horsfall protein? This Tam Horsfall protein is produced by loop of Henle. Loop of Henle produces this Tam Horsfall protein. It takes that cylindrical structure, shape, and it comes out like this transparent cylinder. So this transparent cylindrical structure is known as a hyaline caste. What are the questions that you get? The questions that you get is that it is made up of what? Tam Horsfall protein. From where is that released? That is released from the loop of Henle, and it's a totally normal finding. However, if something comes sticking on top of that cylinder, the same cylinder, but this time red blood cells are coming sticking on top of it, RBC caste, where do you see it? Glomerulonephritis. When RBCs are coming out, RBC caste, glomerulonephritis. On the other hand, if you have the same cylinder, but now white blood cells are coming on top of it, then you call it a white blood cell caste, and that is seen in pyelonephritis. So remember, red blood cell caste, glomerulonephritis, white blood cell caste, pyelonephritis. Coming to the next, for example, this red blood cell caste and this white blood cells, they have been in the kidney for a very long time and they ended up getting degenerated. If they ended up getting degenerated, or probably it is a very old caste, after degeneration you won't be able to see the red blood cells and the white blood cells too well. You will see something like this. You will see something like this over here, which has ... just granularity. So what do you call it? You call it a granular caste. It's just signifying degeneration. Next, if you see the presence of this kind of a caste which is looking just like mud, so you actually call it like that also. You call it a muddy brown caste, and that signifies that something dirty is coming out. Why is something dirty coming out? Because ATN has happened. Acute tubular necrosis, necrosis of the tubules, necrosis of the cells. How else would dead cells look like? Dead cells will look dirty brown only. So when dead cells and tubular necrosis is happening, when dead cells are coming out in the urine, it's obviously going to look dirty brown, and that is why you call it a muddy brown caste. Coming to the last one, and the last one is the most broadest of them all. It is the broad caste, and this broad caste is a caste of chronic renal failure. Chronic renal failure. So if I have to put up all the castes together in one place, I think it's very easy now. The first one that you have is the hyaline caste over here, which is totally normal. When RBCs come, RBC cast, it is seen in glomerulonephritis. When WBCs are here, WBC cast, which is seen in chronic pyelonephritis. When all of them degenerate, it is a granular cast, which is indicative of degeneration. When it becomes dirty and muddy, muddy brown cast, when the cells are dying, ATN. And when it becomes very, very broad, that is a broad cast, which is a cast of chronic renal failure. So that's a summary of all the casts that you need to know. Well, with which we finished both the urine examination in terms of casts and the crystals, and now we can move on to the discussion of the different renal pathologies that you need to know for the exam. So before I go on to other renal pathologies, the images for nephrotic and nephritic, the first thing that I want to sort out over here is this filtration membrane. Where does the urine get filtered is very important. So let me just remove all the labelings, because I want you to just look at it first without any other additional information. It's a black and white picture, so undoubtedly it is electron microscopy. It is where the urine is getting filtered. So there's one lining on the inside, one lining on the outside, and one line in between. So can I say the filtration membrane is a 3-membrane structure? Urine is filtered through a 3-membrane structure, trilaminar. Inner one is endothelium, the capillary endothelium, andar endothelium, bahar epithelium. Which epithelium? Please remember, it is visceral epithelium. That is what you get as a question. It is visceral epithelium. And if you look at the visceral epithelium, are these flat cells or are they having these feet? So you'll say, yeah, they have these feet, they have these foot processes. So these visceral epithelia, they have these foot processes which you know as podocytes. So either you can learn it as foot process or you can learn it as a podocyte. Podo word means foot, right? So they are also known as podocytes. Next, sandwiched in between, you have the glomerular basement membrane, GBM. So what are the 3 layers? You will say the innermost अंदर endothelium है, बाहर epithelium है which has foot processes, and in between you have the glomerular basement membrane, and this together makes the entire filtration membrane. So my take home message is that the filtration membrane is a 3-membrane structure. It is trilaminar. Having said that, now let's move on to a couple of diseases. I think all of us are aware that when I'm talking about kidney per se, I will be talking about 2 things, nephrotic and nephritic. So the first nephritic that I'm going to ask you in the kidney is going to be the most common one in children. And I think in nephritic in children is going to be post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. There are 3 pictures that you get in post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. First you get the gross picture, then you get the immunofluorescence, and then you get the electron microscopy. But gross picture I think we've already studied. Today have we done a mnemonic which read we hate PSM? In that PSM was P for PSGN. So I think everyone knows PSGN is going to show me the presence of flea-bitten kidney grossly. Now let's talk about the other ones. What do we see on immunofluorescence and electron microscopy? In PSGN, the immunofluorescence shows us something known as starry sky appearance. It is known as starry sky granular appearance. And how do I mean by that? See, when I say starry sky, I'll say stars and sky. So stars will always be twinkling and shining more. So some areas will be shining more. So these are the shiny areas, and then some areas are going to fall totally dull. Then again I'll have some shiny areas, then some areas will be dull, just like the stars are twinkling. So that is known as the starry sky appearance. Versus when I look at the black and white electron microscopy, let me get oriented. Can everyone see these foot processes of the epithelium? Is this the epithelial side? Yes. If this is the epithelial side, one foot process has become almost like a mountain. Epithelium has become like a mountain because something is below it. Can I say something is getting deposited below the epithelium, that is subepithelial hump. So please remember, on immunofluorescence, it shows us the presence of subepithelial humps, which is a previous year FMG question also. Sorry, on electron microscopy, it shows us the presence of subepithelial humps, which is a previous year question. And on immunofluorescence, it shows us the classical starry sky appearance. Now, when we'll be doing hematology, we'll study that this starry sky appearance, not same looking like this, but the word starry sky appearance comes 2 times in pathology. So please remember, starry sky appearance, today you've done, it is seen in the immunofluorescence of PSGN. On the other hand, starry sky appearance is also seen with something that I'll be teaching you tomorrow, and that is Burkitt's lymphoma. That also shows you a starry sky appearance, not on immunofluorescence, on regular pink and blue stain of pathology, but yeah, starry skies, 2 places, PSGN and Burkitt's lymphoma. Okay, having done with PSGN, do you all know there's another nephritic syndrome known as RPGN? RPGN means rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis. When I say rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis, that's more of a clinical thing. Patient is rapidly progressing, rapidly deteriorating. But clinically, that's RPGN. Pathologically, it's crescentic glomerulonephritis. So you'll ask me, what is a crescent? See, if this is a glomerulus over here and this is a glomerulus over here, I see that someone is sitting on top of that glomerulus. Means something over here is sitting on top of it. Same way, something over here is sitting on top of it. So there's something like a half moon or a flap that is sitting on top of the glomerulus. That's why I've kept the mnemonic flap. So if someone asks you, what is a crescent composed of? What is the composition of a crescent? You will say it is made up of F for fibrin, it is made up of L for leukocytes, and P I've kept as parietal epithelial cell. Can it also be made up of visceral epithelial cells? Yes, it can also be made up of visceral epithelial cells, but that is rare. What is the more common epithelial cell that you see is parietal. That is why I've kept the mnemonic flap. That is F for fibrin, L for leukocyte, P for more commonly parietal epithelial cells, but also visceral epithelial cells. So if you all remember your theory part well, I had taught all of you that this rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis is of 3 types, and they will ask you the immunofluorescence of those 3 types. So do you remember that the third one, in terms of its immunofluorescence, had no immunofluorescence? The first one, the way you write 1, like a line, you write 1. So the first one has a linear pattern, and the second one has two things. It shows you dark and light. Two, dark and light means starry sky or granular pattern. So repeating, if you see an immunofluorescence, see the green color everywhere is the same. There's no dark, there's no light. There's a same green color like a line everywhere. So if it's like a line, you'll say it is RPGN1. It is RPGN1. Versus if I look at the next one, you'll say, yeah, here I can see some areas are shining bright, some areas are dull. Then again shining bright, then again dull. Two areas are seen, bright and dull, bright and dull. This means I'm dealing with RPGN type 2. So remember, 1 like a line is linear. 2 has two areas, bright and dull, so starry sky. And RPGN type 3 has no deposits. Coming to the other two. Now, there are two very famous appearances that you get in the kidney. First, I'll write the names. There's something known as spike and dome appearance. That is one picture that you need to know. And the other is known as tram track appearance. So first, you should be very clear with the theory that you're going to study. Please remember, spike and dome appearance is seen in membranous glomerulonephritis, whereas tram track appearance is seen in membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis type 1. We'll study this again. The first one that I've said, spike and dome appearance, that is seen in membranous glomerulonephritis. So first and foremost, spike and dome. So I need to find out two things. First, what is the spike and what is the dome? So can I see over here? Yeah, there is a loop, capillary loops, but this time the membrane, basement membrane is looking black. When the basement membrane is looking black, Anything that's looking black means I've somewhere applied a silver stain. So what stain have I applied for the basement membrane over here? I've applied a silver stain, and can you see those blackish areas are like spikes also, they are projecting up. So in the spike and dome, if they ask you what is the spike made up of, and then they ask you what is the dome made up of, so you'll say the spike is coming black in color. This means spike is the basement membrane, and this dome that you have, this dome is the immune complex. So please remember, in spike and dome pattern, the spike is the basement membrane and the dome is the immune complex that is seen in which disease? Membranous glomerulonephritis. Versus when I'm dealing with the next one, guys, what is the next one? Tram track appearance. It is seen in MPGN type 1. So please remember, tram track appearance is very unlikely to come as a picture, but yeah, you have to definitely know it. I've written it because this appearance is very characteristically put up in questions. But if they give you a theoretical question mentioning tram track appearance in the FMG exam, you have to know that you're dealing with MPGN type 1. Well, having said that, the kidney is not over. There are two more images that you get, which are actually the same image put up twice only in different ways. And I think if someone asks you theoretically also that are you going to read diabetic nephropathy, you know it is one of the most important conditions, diabetes affecting the kidney. So if you're asked that which is the most characteristic lesion of diabetic nephropathy, you will all say that it is something known as KW lesion, Kimmelstein-Wilson lesion, KW lesion. And this KW lesion is nothing but a very, it's a very fancy name. If you ask me ground reality, it is nodular glomerulosclerosis. Nodular glomerulosclerosis is the other name. So will you see sclerosis? Will you see pink color material? Yes. Will you see it in the glomerulus? Yes. So is this one entire glomerulus that I see over here? It's a glomerulus. Am I seeing pink material inside it? Yes, there is sclerosis, and it is in a nodular manner. So I can see this is one area of nodule, this is another nodule, this is another nodule, and another nodule. So nodular glomerulosclerosis is known as Kimmelstein-Wilson lesion, is the most characteristic lesion of diabetic nephropathy. And if I ask you, is there any special stain for KW lesion? It's the same glomerulus, the same KW lesion as nodules, but why is it looking more pink? Because I put up a special stain called PAS. PAS positivity is noted with these lesions. So repeating, most characteristic KW lesion or nodular glomerulosclerosis, and it shows you PAS positivity. So guys, with that, the chapter of kidney and its images are done. Now we are left with few miscellaneous images. So when I come to two organs for images of which I want to teach you, one is ovary and one is thyroid. So I think in thyroid there is one tumor which gets you a lot of pictures, and that is papillary carcinoma thyroid. So that's the first image that I want to show you. And you all know what is that very classical nucleus that you see in papillary carcinoma thyroid. So starting with thyroid, starting with PCT, and you can see the nucleus over here is totally white, a totally white color nucleus. Instead of blue, it's clear, optically clear. That is known as orphan Annie eye nucleus. Why was it called orphan Annie eye? Because look at this cartoon character here. So the cartoonist actually forgot to draw the eyes of all the cartoon characters over here in this particular cartoon series. So Orphan Annie was the name of the cartoon character, and the cartoonist forgot to draw the eyes of that cartoon character. So that is why these nuclei also look completely white. And that is the reason that we call it the optically clear or the Orphan Annie eye nucleus. What other nuclear features do I see in papillary carcinoma thyroid? If you see over here, in this nucleus, I see a dot. I see an inclusion. So can I call it an intranuclear inclusion? I call it an intranuclear inclusion. What else? Coming to the next. Do you see over here that this nucleus has a line through it? It's a groove. I can see a groove which gives it a coffee bean kind of an appearance. So the next thing that you see in papillary carcinoma thyroid is the coffee bean nucleus. And what do you see here? Again, it's a nucleus with a dot. Can I call this as the intranuclear inclusion? And can I call this as the groove? In fact, I can see another groove over here. I can see another nucleus with another line going through it, another groove. So these two are grooves. This is an inclusion. And is there any body which we are missing out on? One very famous body for papillary carcinoma thyroid. Yes, the one over here, the Samoma body. So let's put everything together. Papillary carcinoma thyroid shows me this white optically clear nucleus known as orphan Annie nucleus. It shows me the presence of inclusions in the nucleus. It shows me the presence of grooves or coffee bean in the nucleus. It also shows us the presence of Samoma bodies. Well, actually, primarily, this is the only tumor that you're asked. But if I offhand ask you another question, is there any tumor in the thyroid which can show me this apple green birefringence? So as soon as I say that word, that okay, I'm saying apple green birefringence, you'll say, ma'am, apple green birefringence indicates amyloid. Now you're asking me that which tumor of thyroid can show me amyloid deposition. Think ACAL. Which tumor of thyroid can show me A for amyloid and cal for calcitonin? So which tumor of thyroid shows me calcitonin increase? And that is medullary carcinoma thyroid. So if they show you this apple green birefringence, amyloid like deposition in the thyroid, you know that the tumor that you're going to deal with is medullary carcinoma thyroid. Well, other than that, there are no other thyroid tumors that can come up to you as images. Now coming to the next one, what are the things that can come to you from ovary point of view? So guys, when I say ovarian tumors, I think one of the most classical tumors that would probably come to you is this, the classical teratoma. And how do I identify a teratoma? I suppose everyone knows, because teratoma of the ovary or anywhere, a teratoma is identified by teeth and bone and hair and another one with a lot of hair. So that's the classical description that I usually have for a teratoma, right? However, I see something else also over here, and I see this kind of a projection. I see this projection or I see this protuberance, and that is known as the Rokitansky protuberance. That is known as the Rokitansky protuberance, and that is not just a mere showpiece that you have. That is something which is of a lot of significance in the paper. So even as a pathologist, you really need to know that what do I do with this Rokitansky protuberance. So I have to cut through it. Why do I say that I have to cut through this? Because something might be hiding beneath it which I am unable to see right now. So something might be hiding beneath it, and that could be a cancer. So please remember, if I am a pathologist and I get this kind of an ovarian teratoma, I take my scalpel and I cut through it, so that if there's any cancer hiding beneath it, I can see it and I can tell the clinician for the treatment. So Rokitansky protuberance might be a treasure, might be hiding a lot of things underneath. You have to sample it. Having done with this, now let's move on to the next tumor. The next tumor is a very interesting tumor of the ovary, and this is uterus. Okay, over here this is the cervix, and this is number 1 ovary, this is number 2 ovary. So this tumor is bilateral, and I'm saying this is not a tumor from the ovary. This is a tumor which has come from somewhere to the ovary. For example, this patient had a stomach cancer, and that stomach cancer has spread or metastasized to the ovary. So mets to the ovary is known as Krukenberg tumor. Krukenberg tumor is not a primary tumor, it's metastasis to the ovary. In fact, stomach cancer is the most common cancer from which we can get metastasis to the ovary. And what are these cells? These cells I've shown you. I'll show you a high power. These cells, what cells do you see in Krukenberg tumor? You see the signet ring cells, yes. The cells that we see microscopically in a Krukenberg tumor are the signet ring cells. Okay, other than that, what are we left with? Ovarian tumors have two bodies. I think everyone knows one is known as the Koll-Exner bodies, one is known as Schiller-Duval body. So this over here is a Schiller-Duval body. Some people call it Schiller-Duval, some people call it glomeruloid body, and Schiller-Duval body is seen in yolk sac tumor. How do I identify? You'll see a blood vessel. Then you'll see one row of tumor cells. Then you'll see a space, and then you'll see another row of tumor cells. So blood vessel, then tumor, then space, then tumor. Blood vessel tumor, space tumor. When you see this kind of a body, this is a Schiller-Duval body seen in yolk sac tumor. What is the other one that I had taught you? I just taught you there's something known as a Kohl-Exner body. And where do we see a Kohl-Exner body? That is seen in granulosa cell tumor. Please remember, Kohl-Exner bodies are seen in granulosa cell tumor. And what is a Kohl-Exner body? It's a round body, and a same round body with pink material in the center. So you will say that the nuclei will be arranged in a round manner, and there will be pink material in the center, that is Kohl-Exner bodies. Kohl-Exner bodies. But anything special about these nuclei? These nuclei also might have a line inside it. Means if you look at some of these nuclei over here, these nuclei also have a line, that is they have coffee bean nuclei. So what does granulosa cell tumor have? It has Kohl-Exner bodies and it has coffee bean nuclei in the ovary. And that is something that you see in granulosa cell tumor, the marker for which, just a gynae question as a quick recap, the marker for granulosa cell tumor is inhibin. Well, so these two bodies, repeating, Schiller-Duval body in yolk sac tumor, Kohl-Exner body in granulosa cell tumor. These are the two bodies which are very, very important when it comes to ovarian tumors. So we are done with GIT, done with kidney, done with thyroid and ovary. So systemic path images are done. All of you know that every day I'm sharing the PDF on the Telegram group along with every session that we are having. Tomorrow around the same time I will be uploading another video which will be to do with all the RBC, WBC platelet, the hematology part, and I hope you guys are benefiting from that. So in case you are new and you've not been a part of this series, you're not too late. This was the third day. We are continuing this. We'll have another day or two of path, then we'll move on to similar 3-4 days of micro, and I hope these are the set of images which actually help you in the paper. Any other query or any other feedback, anything that you want should be discussed more, please put it up in the comments or write it to me over Telegram and we'll see where we can adjust it, right? Thank you so much for joining. Good night, study well, and see you tomorrow with a similar session on hematology.